Hey everybody, welcome back to Spearfactor, amazing spearfishing podcast with Matthew Bond. Matt and I talk quite a bit actually on Instagram, and we've met in person and stuff. And there's been a lot of hot topics going around about conservation and preservation and all this stuff. And we usually I go to Matt's kind of like at the forefront of a lot of that, or as a good resource for everything. But before we even jump into that, though, I want to know, like, and I say it before, but like, Matt, I know you've been diving for years because you got some old pictures, and it reminds me of like when I first started diving in like 92 or whatever. Yeah, so it just reminds me of that. And I was like, but your background, you're from Santa Barbara, right? Area?
I'm actually from Isla Vista. So if you know where UCSB is, there's a little bedroom community there. And I was, the hospital's in Goleta, but they took me home to Isla Vista. And I lived there until I was about 15 and then moved like 3 miles away to a town called Elwood. But general Santa Barbara area north of Santa Barbara.
So how did you...
Right next to the ocean.
Right. Yeah. And so... like, you know, some straight legends, you know, and
I was brought up in a really cool time, man. Like it was, so I'm 51 and I can honestly say I speared a fish when I was 11. I speared like a little surf perch. Before that, I poked a thornback ray. But I don't count that one. But so I've been, spearfishing for a really long time and swimming around before that. And so that was the era when it was second generation people like the Terry Moss crowd, Rene Rojas, all those guys. And so those were the guys I looked up to, and then there was anyway, I was blessed to be in a really cool time to meet some true pioneers of stuff, particularly gear, and forced to learn how to either make your own gear or fix your own gear and stuff, because there wasn't the amount of shops and things like that now. So just a real, you don't get to choose when you're born, but I got pretty lucky with that.
Yeah, I brought that up a lot too. It really seemed like about the year 2000, everything kind of exploded, but I think just the internet or whatever. But before that, didn't change much from like 1960 to 80s to, it was like, hey, meet me in the back of Home Depot and we're going to like talk about this and then we're going to make stuff.
Dude, I told the story. I've told it, but like, God rest his soul, Rene Rojas. Like we would drive from Santa Barbara down to like Long Beach to El Torito, and they would do the Long Beach Neptunes meeting. But then some of those other Fathom Your guys, they'd all show up, and we would wait in the parking lot. I must have been like 19 or something, and like people would know those guys, and then we'd pick their brains. So Rene Rojas showed me and my buddy Leaf how to braid cable for grouper, because we weren't shooting tuna then. But how to, instead of, not instead, but opening up the braid and then looping it through and all that. I still remember sitting in the parking lot in Long Beach of him showing us how to do that. So there was not YouTube. You had to go actually find people and learn how to do stuff.
Yeah, I think you really needed like a true mentor, because there really was nothing other than, I remember like there was a book in my parents' like 1970s scuba diving book that they got me, and it was a picture of a guy like grabbing, it was a big yellowtail and it was black and white, and there's line everywhere, and he's like in Speedos and a dive belt, and I just like, what's that, as a little kid, like an elementary school kid. But I feel like because of that, you do learn so much about doing things with your hands, and you don't have that shop. But now the learning curve is so steep because there's so much of it. Like, I almost feel like it's too much information where a lot of bad shit can get out there where it's like, no, that's not true.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a big fan of simplicity to start, right? It's just, it's easy to overcomplicate the sport because it's a gear heavy endeavor. What would you call it? thought, I'm trying to think of the word. People that like to think a lot and like engineer type folks seem to gravitate to the sport often. And so you can get real quickly into trying to dial down your gear to some crazy thing before you even learn how to really stalk fish or something like that, you know?
Yeah, 100%. We say like over-engineer it. You like just keep it simple. Well, yeah, because some of the pictures I've seen with you, I'm like, that's fucking badass. Just because those old, like, people don't understand too, you had to go get it developed. And like, those are pictures like that I find in boxes in my attic. And I'm like, man, I probably,
it's glory. I have a picture that I still to this day, I had this crazy day down. Forever I wanted to shoot a big grouper, like a grouper over 50 pounds. And there was not outfitters down in Baja. And in fact, like people would draw like, hey, kilometer marker, whatever here. And then you got it, right? And then we build relationships with pongeros and all that. And so we spent a lot of time trying to shoot grouper. And I had this day where there were Humboldt squid pushed up against, what is the island? Isla Carmen in Laredo. And so there was big freaking pargo and grouper. And I found like a school of big grouper. And which, yeah, it was like what, and I shot a big yellow. I shot like, it was the most ridiculous day. It kind of changed my thought process a little bit too. But, I shot a big, like a 40-ish yellow and then a couple good pargo, not real big, but like 20-pound pargo. But then it was an 87-pound grouper. And I, big, long story, got that thing, got it into the boat and was like, holy crap. And then got back in the water and I shot one that was 102 pounds. Okay. So I have a picture of the 87-pound grouper, and it's like the coolest picture I have, and I'm just like epitome of my youth. But I don't have a picture of any of the rest of those fish and like two giant grouper and stuff because we were out of film. And to your point of like a camera, I remember it, but there wasn't like, let me delete a picture and then take another one. All of that stuff was not captured because after taking a picture of that one big grouper, we were done. So,
yeah, we had disposable cameras. Like I did, my wife, we have a kind of a funny story where like I was surfing and it was about 30 feet or whatever. And she's snapping pictures away, you know, and then realized there's no film in the camera. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry, babe. And then the next time the camera, like just funny.
Oh yeah.
But the cameras, now it's different. But, so how would you describe, like, when did you really like, have you always been like just gung-ho serious with spearfishing? Like when did you when did you go to college at and all that?
Yeah. So I went to college at UCSB. I got serious, probably sophomore year of high school. I started really geeking out on it. There's a mentor of mine, this guy, Brent McQueen. He was one of the youngest Neptunes ever. He still lives in Santa Barbara, great guy. And he had me at some point read Last of the Blue Water Hunter, Carlos Isles, and that got, you know, and then I had a buddy, my great friend Leaf, he and I came up in it together. And we just would, you know, every moment drawing pictures of fish and just thinking about it all the time. And we were blessed with real good halibut where I was down there. So, moved pretty quickly from shooting, like perch and stuff to calico bass and then halibut. White sea bass were still being gill netted a lot. So you'd see little tiny ones every now and then, but most of what we did was halibut. And I started like taking notes on it and trying to figure out what the, you know, the water clarity was. And, you know, just, I still have those notes. It's kind of cool. And then got like real serious when I was like, right when you started, like I graduated in 1991 and I speared my first white sea bass, legal white sea bass in 1991. And then started like going on Baja trips and getting out to the islands more and stuff like that and working on diving deeper and those things. And so that's kind of when probably 18 years old, 19 years old.
No, that's cool. And it's funny back then too, the network was really, you had one friend and you guys were dialed in because there was nobody
else, man.
Yeah.
There was like clubs. So there was Neptunes in Santa Barbara. We had a group called Del Pacificos, but they were real close knit. My buddy Brent made a club called, because Isla Vista has natural seepage of oil from the the seafloor. And so there's tar everywhere. And so he made a club when he was in college called the Isla Vista Tarheads. So we joked around, and he's about 10 years older than us. We called ourselves the Isla Vista Tarheads because I really did always have tar in my hair from diving. But it was like little clicks. It would be like our few friends, and there's the other guys. And it's so funny now, like there's so many friggin' divers. Like back then, if there was somebody like free diving and spearfishing, you knew who they were because there was just like not that many people doing it.
But it's funny you say that because I feel like it wasn't that long ago. I mean, maybe the early 2000s, you knew everybody.
Yeah.
And like you knew everybody's boat. Oh, that's Martin. Or, oh, that's, you know. Yeah. And now there's like 4 boats, 1 spot. And you're like, what is this guy doing? Or who, you know, whatever.
Why is he on my spot? Why is he on my spot?
Yeah. What the, are you kidding me right now? Like, yeah.
Know who I am? Do you know who I am?
Yeah. You start to morph into that guy. Yeah, it's awesome. But how did you, so you live now currently up in, north of San Francisco, right?
No, not north. I'm south. I'm in San Jose, like Morganville, San Jose, south end of San Jose. And, my wife is from, my wife's from the Philippines, but they moved to the Bay Area out of the Philippines, and her family was here. And I wanted to get into, I do like personal wealth management. I have a little company. And so this was a much better place to do that. And she was up by her, family, which was much better. So we moved up here about a little over 20 years ago, and put a damper on diving for a while, but we've got Monterey Bay here. So I switched from white sea bass and yellowtail and that stuff to shooting lingcod and cabezon and vermilion, to whole. And it's kind of similar diving to, particularly if you're spearing calico bass and ocean whitefish and stuff, and kind of how I grew Santa Barbara diving. So I fit right in up here.
Very cool. How, like, I mean, some days up there, it seems like the viz is just incredible, especially.
Oh, we get nutty viz sometimes. Like, and like right now it's, guys are saying it's like 30, 40 foot. It's still cold. Last time I went diving, we had 52 at the surface and 48. I wasn't diving deep enough to get to 48, but it's cold because we have some of the best upwelling. I think I don't want to lie, but like in the world, there's so much upwelling here and so many little microclimates that real specific areas will get upwelling, and then the water drops. You've seen the pictures of the Monterey Canyon, like it drops to the end of the earth, kind of like the thing you guys got there in La Jolla.
Yeah.
And you get turnover, and you get that deep water, and then it takes about a day for life to get into it, and then it can just be fantastic, man. There's nothing like diving in a really heavily like a healthy kelp forest when it's crystal clear. Really cool.
Oh, 100%. That's like San Clemente Island too, is the same. It's it's just, I was going to say, because Big Sur, I know, has that drop off. Like it gets a ton of cold water. Big Sur is some of the coldest water.
Big Sur, man, is just, also it's just like a natural reserve because it's so hard to get there. Like the road to southern Big Sur for us has been closed for a long time now. And then it's windy and crappy, and it takes the straight south swell perfectly. So it's just like, when you get a day down there, and it's flat and clear, it's just like, I'd recommend it to anyone, even if it's a long drive. It's something to see because it's just, I don't want to say untouched, but it's just very abundant, very beautiful place.
Yeah. I also heard very sharky too, but I mean, so is anywhere really above.
Listen, down there.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. Like you might want to stop diving if that's really a concern. We've had that conversation about just the whole it's sharky is irrelevant now because there's just sharks. It is.
Yeah,
I feel like there was a time period where it was so rare. Maybe we just didn't have cameras, but I just don't remember hearing so much about. I mean, obviously the juveniles, but I just don't remember hearing so much about the sharks until the last 20 years.
We've had two cycles of, so gill nets were knocked out, I think in 1997. Don't quote me on the year, but we near shore gill nets. So 3 miles off, the mainland and 1 mile off the islands. And gill nets were killing lots and lots of sharks, lots of sharks. And we've had a good, I think I was talking to someone, I want to say it's a 10-year period where they would be born and grow up and have. So we've had a couple of those. And and we've had a return of the pinnipeds that they eat, and some water regime stuff. But if you look at like what we have with white sea bass now, what you have with big home guard yellowtail again, what we have with angel sharks, soup fin sharks, seven gills that are eating all your white sea bass and yellowtail when you spear them. That is all a direct result of gill nets being limited a good 25 years ago or so. So that's a big part of it.
And I've heard that from my mentor, and it was like he was there before he started, and then I would say 100%. Even it seems like it's exponentially getting to where every year we're getting bigger and bigger grade yellowtail up here. We're getting like Baja size yellowtail, especially this year.
They grow fast, all those fish. But if you think about big fish have more eggs and more sperm and breed more successfully generally, it is exponential.
Yeah.
We're going to get into the conservation thing here, but like that's a good story. The tuna too, right? Our tuna don't get to, in our bite, don't really get to full sexual maturity. They kind of split off when they get the big. But dude, a 300-pound tuna is like 5 years old. they grow so fast, And so giving our resources a proper break or proper management from time to time using science is tremendous. We can point to those sorts of actions. We talked about like an interesting time to be born or a cool time to be born, or at least I said that with learning spearfishing. Also, like I was born at the end of like abalone being able to just be getting them on the beach. I still remember getting that. So I saw that decline. But then I saw from seeing gill nets draped all around the home kelp beds with everything stuck in them to those being gone. And then pretty quickly, the little 27-inch white sea bass became 32-inch white sea bass. And then within 5 years, you had 15, 20-pound fish. And now people are shooting records. That's been the story of my time in the ocean hunting, is watching those fish recover. Pretty cool. Same with halibut. I mean, there's a lot of halibut now.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. This, like you said, we're going to get into the conservation piece, but from, as my friend said, from someone who's just been sticking their face in the water for 30 years, I don't need data to know that whatever we're doing is working.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing for everybody. So, yeah, it's awesome.
Yes.
So, I guess let's just jump into the conservation piece. When did you really start to get involved, or what was the catalyst for you getting involved with more and more about the conservation side of things?
Yeah. So it's funny. It started with the gill nets. So that was really a fisherman driven, and a lot of spear fishermen in Santa Barbara were involved with that. So I was aware of that. I was, I think, working at the dive store doing something, and we had signs up everywhere. And so that was interesting to see that work. I really got involved. So there was a process in 1999 or 2000 called the Marine Life Protection Act, MLPA. And it was, we got to set aside areas completely preserved, minimal. And what I mean preserved fishing, areas for no fishing, areas with a little bit of fishing, and areas that allow fishing. And they need to act in a network. Prior to that, there was a trial run, if you will, at the Channel Islands off of Santa Barbara. So maybe it might have been 99, 98, 99, maybe 2000. But so I got involved in that because they were, I was diving the islands at that time a lot. And there were large preservationist groups, same ones that are at play now, for a lot of good reasons. And I'm not going to beat up marine protected areas. They are a great tool. They really are. And so it's really important. And that's something I want to hammer over when I really talk about what we're doing with all waters and everything. We gotta be good stewards, and there is lots of weird stuff going on with the ocean and everything else, and so we got to be good stewards. So I want to be real clear on that. But there was every area was put on a map and said we're going to close it, and you guys have to come to consensus with you guys spear fishermen have to come to consensus with commercial fishermen and with people from the Audubon Society and from people from all these different walks that want completely different things. Come to consensus and build maps that you feel okay with. And it was a long and hard process. And so me and a guy named Matt Lum, who's a really good, famous white sea bass diver, were the consumptive diver working group reps for the Santa Barbara area. When that then became the Marine Life Protection Act, and we're still dealing with that when we get into today's battle, I'll talk about that. I was tasked with some of the coastal stuff in Santa Barbara, and really where I think learned how to swim, definitely learned how to catch stuff in the tide pools, is now one of the largest marine reserves in our network, no-take marine reserve, and it's built around UC Santa Barbara. And at the time, I was very opposed to that. And the reason I was very opposed to that, I've shared this in other podcasts, and we'll share it again in my passion for what I'm doing now. I did not grow up with a lot of money. Grew up in a beautiful place. I have wonderful parents, visited my dad today, a wonderful guy, but my folks were divorced, and we lived with my mom. And my mom did arts and crafts at the beach show in Santa Barbara to support us, so didn't make a lot of money. I lived with my two sisters. I have a younger sister and an older sister. We were on government assistance for a lot of my lives, meaning food stamps. We got the wonderful government cheese and bread. We didn't have a car till I was 13 years old. And I grew up with, because of the university community and some other things going on, just geopolitical at the time, grew up surrounded by people from Southeast Asia. So a lot of Laotian people, Hmong people, Vietnamese people, Cambodian people, Filipinos, the friends from Chile, from Bolivia. It was this really cool area. And we all didn't have a lot of money. And the ocean was what we did for recreation. We'd go down to the tide pools when it was low tide. We would go forage in the tide pools. We fished on the piers. We fished off the beach and later spearfished. And the fish that I caught, we didn't eat it every day, but the fish that I caught was something we ate on a weekly basis and something I gave to the neighbors. And it gave me a sense of accomplishment as a young man. Like I was providing for the family. In retrospect, I recognize that. But B, it allowed my mom we had money stress, man. And it would be like, okay, so now there's fish on the table, there's halibut or whatever it was. She didn't have to buy chicken or something that day, and maybe there's a couple extra bucks to do whatever with. It was a meaningful part of my life and our economics. And so it occurred to me, and it occurs to me even now, if I was born now, I wouldn't have my life. If I was born now, the whole area where I was, where there's a bunch of under the poverty line people, still are, next to the beach, you can't fish now. I would not have been able to develop the skills that I have now because of the placement of that MPA. And I kind of saw that then. Funny, I look at that MPA now, and it's a pretty cool MPA. They closed a really nice area. Doesn't affect me now. It's had some spillover with sheephead and lobster and stuff like that. But they did not consider the impacts that it was making on people without voices, right? And so that's what got me involved then, and that's why I got re-involved now. I had almost PTSD from that stuff back then because it was such a acrimonious process. And you had really big money, and it's the same really big money that we have now. Groups like Resource Legacy Fund, NRDC, National Resource Defense Council or Center, the Ocean Conservancy, all well and good. They want to preserve the ocean, but I'm using the word preserve. They have a close it down and let it do its thing, and nobody catches fish anymore. And so that was there, and there's millions and millions of dollars and millions of dollars going into the universities that are funding the studies to make this happen. And as a young man, when you still are, you believe things are true and they're going to work well, it was crazy to see that stuff and crazy to see some of the negotiations we had to do. So I quickly learned nothing got done in the meetings. We would meet with a professor who's still at UCSB, who ended up really being a strong advocate, if you will, on the scientific side for shutting stuff down. We'd meet with him and try to negotiate with him. We'd meet with people from the Ocean Conservancy. We were able to keep a couple key areas. We were able to keep an area open on the backside of Santa Cruz Island where we shoot white sea bass by saying, hey, we'll let you, or not let you, we will agree that it's a good idea to close down Carrington Point. We'll agree that it's a good idea to close down Winfield Scott on Anacapa, but please keep this one area open near Gull Island. We did the same thing on the coast. when the real MLPA process came to keep a couple high spots open. None of that was done in the meetings, the public meetings. What was done in the public meetings is we followed through on what we said we'd do. We stood up and said, we back them doing this or that. And so I was talking about PTSD. It was just like, it felt we had no chance. We lost a lot of great areas. We did a lot of good work. Some of those preserves are wonderful. They're all great. I mean, they're not at this point, the level we have, not hurting anything. But I learned a hard lesson in kind of public process back then. So, fast forward, if it's okay, because we're talking about it. So that thing's called the Marine Life Protection Act. There has to be, based on the legislation, every 10 years of a review, and they put them in 2012. So 10 years later, scientists and sociologists and everyone else goes and looks at them and goes, how are they doing? Are they doing good or are they doing bad? And are there ways to make changes to them? It's called adaptive management, to make them better, to make them more effective. And at that adaptive management, the beginning of the adaptive management process, a bunch of those same non-governmental organizations put, I think, 20 or 23 petitions in front of the Fish and Game Commission, not asking for adaptive management and minor changes, which is what everyone expected, but for wholesale changes, meaning a brand new marine reserve. And like, as we're talking right now, our page is All Waters on Instagram. We just posted a visual of what they want to do with the Cabrillo Marine Reserve off of Point Loma. It's a little tiny thing on the tip of Point Loma. They want to move it all the way up to Swordfish Point and then push it out to the 3-mile stay water line. It's a 15.2 square mile expansion. And so there's arguably 20 of those. Big one all in front of Santa Cruz, California, and that's how I got involved. I don't really even dive in Santa Cruz, but I'm up here, and there's, I know some people, and Brandon Whalers actually introduced me to a guy named Chris Killen, who was going, what do we do? And a guy named Sean Dollar, and they were trying to figure out, what do we do? And they started this group called All Waters, and the idea was to advocate for the voices that don't get to be heard. Predominantly our children, are the future that are going to be impacted by having fishing taken away, and by those people like me when I was a little kid, or better yet, like the Filipino dudes that are fishing off the pier or off the cliffs right now, that don't even know this is going on. And when I say, like, I'm talking about Santa Cruz, like all of Capitola, all the natural bridges gone, all of Point Sal gone, expanding the one in Malibu. And we don't lose fishing there, but you lose lobster and scallop and anything else. 26 miles up the backside of Santa Rosa Island. 26 miles up the backside of Santa Rosa Island. All of the front side of Anacapa Island. Big chunk in Carpinteria, California. I think I said Point Sal. If I didn't, I don't remember. Point Sal, California. Farnsworth Bank, which is an interesting one. I know a lot of people like to fish there. No fishing at Farnsworth Bank. It would be spearfishing only. So I'm all about that one. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I love that one.
But so why I got involved is Chris Killen and Sean Dollar reached out to me. I had this experience in doing this and had some relationships and ideas of what was going to happen. And we put this group, All Waters, together to advocate for those voiceless people. And it's just been, it's been constant. And I just talked about the Marine Life Protection Act process. That's only one of the processes. About at the same time, there was a bill called AB 3030. A lot of people have heard of the 3030 campaign or Project 2030. It's this idea, it's an international idea that because we don't know what's going to happen with climate change and how it's going to affect biodiversity on the earth, a coalition of scientists have said that it would be smart or precautionary to preserve, or I would say conserve. Let me use the right word, conserve, meaning you can still have some extracted uses, but we'll get to that in a second. 30% of all land assets, 30% of all freshwater assets, 30% of all marine assets, right? So put that all in some sort of thing that's durably protected with rules to help biodiversity and ecosystems be more resilient to climate change. That's the idea. And then so that's the bill. We had a bill. The bill failed because the bill faced a lot of opposition. And so right after the bill failed, Gavin Newsom executive ordered it. And so he put out an executive order directly. And so I talked about this Marine Life Protection Act that started in 2000, I think, 10-year cycle. And I talked about these petitions, right? Let's pretend that's done. There's a whole other process going on at the same time with a lot of the same entities and some of the same decision makers that says we've got to put 30% of our land, 30% of our freshwater assets, and 30% of the ocean into some sort of protection. And so that's going on at the same time too. And that's an interesting one. That's one where there's a lot more involvement. Like we're looking at national marine sanctuaries, which cover a lot of our water. For some reason, they count in the federal definition of protected, but California has decided to have them not count. And so we have to kind of argue or figure out why they don't count. And there's little things we can do to maybe make them count. But our way of life, let me summarize, because I just got really complicated and it's hard not to, and I apologize for that. Our way of life is under attack. I want to say from mostly well-meaning folks, with good reason. They want to protect biodiversity. But what they're missing is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? There is not a fishing crisis. We started talking about, you've seen it get better. I'll give you real data on seeing it get better. At the last Fish and Game Commission meeting, part of the deal is we have Pacific Fisheries Management Council that manages all of our federal managed ground fish, right? Things like lingcod and cabezon and vermilion rockfish and all that. And they make rules for the federal, and a lot of those fish are in state water. So we want those two fisheries management mechanisms to match up. So the state adopts the federal regulations. They just did that. In those new federal regulations, because of fisheries recovery, they're doing away with the size limit for cabezon, doing away with the size limit for sculpin or California scorpion fish, and doing away with the size limit for greenling, because there's no need for it anymore. They're recovering. And I would say abalone are obviously in trouble. Nothing to do with humans, everything to do with marine blobs and starfish dying and that type of stuff. Quillback rockfish are having some trouble. But on both of those species, or both of those genera, the Fish and Game Department of Fish and Wildlife, I should say, used what's called, again, adaptive management and said, abalone in crisis. Let's talk to the Fish and Game Commission. We need to shut this down. Quillback are in crisis. We need to not even let people fish out there anymore and move it inside. So we have mechanisms that if there were problems even on an ecosystem level, we have mechanisms to deal with it. Nobody has shown us that there is a problem right now. There's what's called the precautionary principle, that there might be problems in the future because of climate change. There are in other places in the world that don't have the same fishing regulations that we do. And so we're going through this process of potentially disenfranchising millions of people, changing cultures, completely changing the way that Californians live their life. If reserves go in places like Point Loma and Santa Cruz, because of a what if. We have not been shown data on here's the problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah, so a couple of questions and points, I guess. The thing specifically, because I can speak to, because Point Loma, if you where they want to shut it down, it's like literally the entire kelp where we dive. If you shut that down, the amount of pressure now it's going to put on areas like La Jolla, where there's only one spot to go. And so one kelp area to go, because there's already Marine Protection Acts there as well.
Yeah.
You're going to overload those areas with the amount of people.
You got it.
Yeah. So I feel like that's one thing that they're probably not considering.
They are considering it, but they downplay it. And
right.
It's downplayed. And there's a couple of studies, and this is one of the things, because what I always want to do with these, and I got to be really, I talk a lot, and so I always want to do a call to action. What we really want to do with these types of things is bring up those points, right? And what happened before they put these marine reserves in? We have 16.2% of our coast in marine reserves, and I want to say 9 or 10% are no take, right? And so recreational fishing doesn't have landings other than party boats, right? Commercial fishing has landings and party boats have landings. So there was science done to say what impact was done to recreational fishing, right? And what they did was they looked at commercial landings and they looked at party boat landings after they put in these 16.2% in 2012 over the years and said, oh, there was a little dip in the beginning, but now it's better or not much change. Well, because those types of users can go other places. If I'm a commercial person and I go, okay, they just shut off this area for sea bass, right? I need to pay my boat note, and I need to pay my mortgage, and I need to pay, right? I'm going to go, shit, I got to work. And so I'm going to go somewhere else. It might be farther, and I might work more. I might work 7 hours a week to get it done. And then, oh my gosh, look, my numbers are the same. My revenue is the same, or my landings are the same. What almost all of these petitions do is use commercial and party boat data at best and try to extrapolate it, if you will, to people like you and me, and even worse, not people like you and me, people that are feeding themselves, right? And that's not okay. And so we're at a point now really where we want to tell those stories. We want to say, hey, my name's Brent. I've lived here for this long. Here's what this will do. They don't have the local knowledge. The one in Point Thal is bonkers to me. So there's this petition in Point Thal that says it's a great area. Here's the scientific rationale. It's got healthy kelp, and we want to protect the healthy kelp. We could talk about the validity of the idea of protecting kelp with MPAs too. We'll get there next. But let's assume that works. We want to protect this healthy kelp. And a big reason we're doing it is there's a lot of people down the road in Orchid and over here that are below the poverty line, and having this big marine reserve here will help these people down the road when climate change hits still be able to fish. So we're going to stop them being able to fish. If they knew the area, and they admit in the petition you have to put economic and fiscal rationale and impact. In the petition, they said we were not, at the time of submitting the petition, we were in conversations with the Department of Fish and Wildlife to get information on recreational fishing usage at the spot. We don't have it. But based on these studies that I just talked to you about, we don't think it's going to be a big deal. That's the cavalier attitude that these studies are taking. I want to call it an ivory tower attitude, because you have people from the outside, mostly academics, that are looking at areas and thinking they're doing the best thing for the community in a lot of these petitions, and they don't understand how we fish and what we do and who's fishing, right? So we got to tell those stories, Brett. And when I text you and I'm like, I got to get on the podcast, we're at a place now where they're starting to evaluate for validity. Should this thing even go further? Places like Point Loma. And if we can get, I was DMing with the folks at San Diego Freedivers. We need to tell our stories. They have college kids. CalPERG is knocking on doors in your neighborhood, asking people, would you like the highest protections possible for the ocean? Yes, I would.
Me too. Yeah.
Me too. Great. You're part of the 81% of Californians that want the highest level of protections for California, or of Californians who want the highest level of protection for ocean. They're presenting that in rooms full of just them and maybe like one or two of us, because they're professionals. They're paid to go to these meetings. Again, they're good people with good intentions, but the system is stacked, and we can't show up on a Tuesday at 9 o'clock in the morning mostly to say, hey, please don't take away Point Loma. It's going to hurt me. So what we need to do is use social media. We need to use letters, and we'll put tools out on all waters to do this. And we need to show them in a completely genuine and true way. Here's the faces of the people, and here's what these people do, and here's what this means, right? That's what we need to do. That's our only hope.
Why are they not going after commercial? Like I have a ton of friends that fish commercial, so I'm not shitting on them, but like,
no, good question.
The impact that we give is so like you're taking one or two telcos.
It's
go ahead.
Question. I'm going to interrupt you.
Perfect. Go.
I'll tell you, because it's the same thing I asked myself. I don't personally like gill nets. Not my thing. Don't like them. In this process, I've been talking to a lot of smart people that manage our fisheries, right? And they're managed scientifically for sustainability. They're also managed to feed people. Our commercial fisheries are managed to feed people. For sustainability, I might not like what I call messy fishing methods like gill nets and trawling and things like that. But they feed a lot of people, okay? And they feed a lot of people. Those boats, if I take a gill netter out and he catches a bunch of white sea bass, and it goes to the dock down there and it goes all over the place, the amount of carbon footprint that's expended to do that versus somebody going out and catching their own fish, even if they could, commercial's better in that spot. But let's say it's not. Let's say take the carbon footprint off. Here's the argument we have to understand. If I'm arguing that what we do is sustainable, and an executive level fisheries biologist at the Department of Fish and Wildlife says, yeah, it's sustainable. It fits within these rules that we laid out. You can take 5 halibut, you can take 3 white sea bass, all that. If I then out of the other side of my mouth go, well, commercials aren't sustainable. They're using the same science for them, right? So we have to support the idea. We asked the key question. You went like this to me. What's the problem? Guess what, Brett? Fishing's not the problem. There is not a fishery, a commercial fishery or a sports fishery that's in peril right now. And if it is, it's already being addressed. So they shouldn't be. Yeah. I'll give you what they should be looking at. Fishing is not the problem. What fishing is it's a lever that's easy to pull. You have Tijuana River down the road from you, where I can show you paper after paper that water that is darkened with effluent doesn't allow light to get down to the seafloor and affects kelp growth rates. It does all kinds of bad stuff, right? Ocean acidification is a big problem. You guys have 2 invasive seaweeds down there. I just saw the Port of San Diego maybe a couple months ago declared a local emergency because you had so much of this, I think, Korean kelp growing there. There's all of these real problems,
right,
that MPAs won't fix. The only thing MPAs fixes is fishing, and it only fixes legal fishing, meaning someone can still go poach an MPA. And so they're I'm stealing the words of a lady that kind of got me fired up on this. One of the commissioners, Erica Zavaleta, at a meeting in February said, why are we using the blunt tool of a marine protected area when we have scalpels, right? If we need them. And that's really I apologize for interrupting you, but fishing's not the problem. Sports fishing's not the problem. Commercial fishing's not the problem. If there are problems, it's overall global warming, which is a problem that is in whatever is going on with marine heat waves, millions of gallons of sewage, street runoff, pesticides running off into the water. None of those things are being addressed in this process. It's only fishing.
So that's a super good point. I know I work in Imperial Beach, and there's not a day I go down there there's not a warning and high levels of bacteria, and then combine that with anytime it rains here in Ocean Beach, I serve at the jetty, and the same signs up because there's a homeless camp up the river that it's all piss and shit. Pardon me, like that comes down, and I've gotten 2 staph infections.
I've got staph right now. I've got staph there, and I've got staph here from diving near a creek up here. It's
insane to me because, Clean Water Act, all this stuff. But I remember when I was in Guam, and I've said this story before on here, I was in Guam for 6 months, didn't wear earplugs at all, not one ear infection. Then I came back here, surfed for 2 weeks. I forgot they were my earplugs one time, and I got an ear infection.
Yep. And take away E. coli, and sorry for us for our freaking staff and all that stuff, but also our storm drain system. If I look at climate change and what it looks like is we're going to have some years that are far wetter, that stuff hasn't been touched in a lot of places since the 1950s. And there's no buffer that there used to be in estuaries. And so just street runoff with gasoline and plastic particles, and you're in an agricultural area, particularly up by Carlsbad, and we are here obviously with Salinas and all that running into the Monterey Bay. They're spraying methyl bromide and all kinds of other stuff. Paul Young, kind of a famous U.S. national spearfisherman guy, and he shoots all the record striped bass up here. He lives up and dives in the Delta, or is up in that area, and he says up there they have for the invasive species of seaweed they put herbicide stuff. How is that not running into the freaking bay? And so, again, those are expensive problems to deal with because you have to deal with corporations, and you have to deal with private property rights, and you have to deal with farming, and I have to deal with fresh water and all that stuff. Really difficult.
Because they're trying to feed people too, right? Like, essentially, it's the same argument.
So the fishing thing is an easy lever to pull, and it's also I'll say it's a tested business model, right? They've done it once before. They closed a lot of things. There's grants and all kinds of things going on for universities and NGOs and things like that involved in the management and study of those things. There's papers to be written. There's careers to be made. And it's already been done. Why do you think they keep remaking movies? Because they don't have any original ideas anymore. And the old movies people liked, and they work, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I could talk about that. I got a buddy that works in Hollywood. We were just talking about that, how they remake Twisters.
Yeah.
Instead of it's like the same stuff because it's a money making thing. It works.
Yeah.
But
and this thing works. It works particularly on the economic side for a lot of the stakeholders who are pushing these things. There are definitely financial incentives. It is their business. The Resource Legacy Fund, NRDC, Ocean Conservancy. Again, I have to expect they're doing out of a good place, and they just have a different philosophy on how to take care of the ocean. And so I'm going to give them that benefit of the doubt. But they cannot argue me that when these things go in, it's part of their business. Then they write grants for people to manage them. They ask for more donations for those types of things. It's a business. And then you have people at the universities and academics involved. And so we're dealing with science that's done in other places that is not relatable to, let's say, Central California kelp ecosystems. There's one lobster study that shows spillover at the Channel Islands of 225%. And so we're saying that's going to happen everywhere. It's not the scientists, it's the people that, I can go on the internet and cherry pick some pretty cool stuff, man. And so the scientists that are involved are ethical people for sure. I don't think anyone's writing BS, but what they're doing is being presented opportunities to write on certain topics.
So I think where the line gets blurred, and you know more about this than I do, but we say scientists, so there's like real true scientists. And then there's like some sort of hybrid, like career chasing person that maybe has a scientific background, but they're really now focused on an agenda. They just happen to have I work with a ton of people from when I trained dolphins that, bachelor's in biology and centered on conservation. And then they get caught up in these organizations and it's like, so
it's a great distinction to make.
Go ahead.
All of the organizations have people like that, and the organizations have an agenda. Like I have an agenda. My agenda is to speak for the voiceless people and take care of our ocean and keep fishing access open when it's sustainable activities. These other people have agendas where they want to preserve areas and there be no take whatsoever on the precautionary principle. We have divergent views of the world. And those organizations definitely have scientists or people with scientific backgrounds that help them formulate arguments and so forth. Luckily, we do have a process, and this is why before my call to action was we need to speak up, right? Luckily, we have a tremendous framework in this state. We have the Department of Fish and Wildlife. We have the Fish and Game Commission. We have a group called the Ocean Protection Council, and on and on and on. And we have all these very smart scientists that, I'm going to say it, works for us. And so if we compel them, they already have laid out a process that kind of mandates they look at these things scientifically. But if we shine lights on certain ones, the scientists who work for us as citizens of California aren't going to have an agenda bias. They shouldn't have an agenda bias, and there's generally groups of them. And so I feel very confident that we need to focus on the process. We started doing that, and you could see we wrote a specific letter asking them. We're not asking them, saying, "Hey, you guys agreed on this process." It's called the MLPA Master Plan from 2016. Why aren't you following it? The process says that you're supposed to have funding before you do this. The process says that you're supposed to do outreach in these ways. The process says here's what your science advisory board looks like. You guys aren't doing any of that. And so the call to action now for us is the spearfishing clubs are a great spot, podcasts like this, but I'm just trying to spread the word, and All Waters will put out templates and help people. Personalized letters are better than us doing some, canned spam thing, but videos also. Someone just saying, "Hey, my name's Matt. I grew up here. I did this." We got to show them here's who we are. And then that's part of it, what I would call the numbers part of it. When All Waters and CCA California and Backcountry Hunters and Anglers and American Sports Fishing Association, we're a coalition with all those people. When they're talking, it's not just Matt blowing hot air. It's these people that are there. So we need to show those people. And then behind the scenes, what we're doing is writing letters, meeting with commissioners, meeting with elected officials, and we can use help doing that too. And that's a whole nother strategy we can talk about. But saying, here's what the law says. Here's what you guys said you were going to do. Here's what's wrong with this petition. Here's what you haven't considered. And we need to drive the process, because right now the process is completely driven by the sponsors of the petitions.
Right. Who have their agenda, as we all do. So it's only one side being heard, I guess. And to be really, and made out of fairness, if we were showing up and speaking politely, they'll listen. They're there to listen to us. They're asking for stakeholder input. These meetings are just set up in a way that's very difficult for most of us to give stakeholder input. And it doesn't help that people's attention spans are so short now. And it doesn't help that the opposition, if you will, is all paid to be there, right? So in the stakeholder, like they have these collaborative groups. MPA Collaborative is something that's everywhere, and they would like us to be attending those. Some of the people from San Diego freedivers attend those. They're wholly owned by Resource Legacy Fund. They're owned by the people that are funding a lot of the petitions. And they're way underrepresented by what I call consumptive users. If we went there, it's going to be 90% other people. So do I feel comfortable as a fisherman having an opposite opinion of everyone else?
it's not a free and clear place for me to share my input. But they're using that input, or that input at least is being presented to be used as in some cases they will say consensus, that stakeholder consensus. There was no fisherman there, or there was one. So we need to show up, and we don't have the means that Resource Legacy does. So we need to start building our voice in the public eye.
Okay. So yeah, because the one thing that I actually watched the entire public hearing, because the way this kind of happened, if anybody's been paying attention to my I don't know, whatever, social media, but somebody had messaged me, and I apologize, I forgot who it was. Why don't you get more involved in conservation stuff or whatever? And I was like, man, I don't have the temperament for it, because I don't know. And I also don't know, other than my own personal thing of like, I can control my own house. I don't know enough to, anyways, everybody has their agenda. I don't know enough, and I don't worry about time. That's the other thing. But then I watched the whole meeting that you had, and I was like, hey, where's this at? Because I do have a tendency to go like 0 to 60. So I want to be educated on it. So I watched the whole meeting, and I was like, this is so interesting to me. So then I was in Oklahoma at the time in a hotel room. So then I went down this rabbit hole of researching everybody on the board, and everybody on the board, like there is, like you said, there's really not a unbiased person on there. They're either special interest kind of groups, or they got put there to further the Gavin Newsom's agenda for the 30, whatever it was. So we do have an uphill battle, but like you said, there's processes. And
I got the reasonable people on that, because I think it's important.
Yeah.
They're volunteers, right? Like all those people are volunteers. They have full-time jobs.
I didn't even know that. Yeah.
The more I know all of them, even ones that I would say maybe aren't on our side, if I look at their track record of what they've done over their overall tenure, they've done tremendous things for us. I gotta say that.
Okay.
And so,
yeah, and I want to be fair, by the way.
That's trying to be really. There's been a lot of just. So we posted a video of one of the commissioners saying that fishing was a privilege. It blew up like crazy. And people said really mean things. Like, and we need, as a group, all waters, we've already made the decision to do better in terms of limiting. That stuff has no place. Personal attacks on people.
And the other thing is, it does nothing but hurt our cause.
And it did.
Because we sound like a bunch of dumbasses, rather than saying, well, she has an agenda, whatever, say your piece.
Yeah.
But if you just go this dumb,
and
whatever.
People said, and so we need to fix that going forward. She did a very graceful thing in speaking at the committee meeting and saying that she was emotional at the time and is a human like the rest of us and does make mistakes, and she misspoke and shared some of the crappy stuff that people said. And I still feel bad for it. And I've had conversations, and it's one of those genies that's at the bottle, out of the bottle. So how do you fix it? So when we're talking about this, I want to be really fair. I don't want to say this person has an agenda or that person has an agenda, because when I dive deeper into it, there's enough things to say that the agenda should have been in action here, and it wasn't, if that makes sense. So what I do want to say, though, and I'm going to keep going back to it, is I do trust the process. There's 5 of them. 3 of them have to vote on something for it to pass. And before it even gets to a vote, there's the Department of Fish and Wildlife, who does a bunch of the scientific and socioeconomic research. They're asking for input all over the place. So it's a good process, but it's an overwhelmed process, Brett. Like, if you sat through that whole meeting, again, the last
2 hours,
it's nuts how much they have to do. Like, on a volunteer basis. So I'm trying to think of how to say this not negatively. They don't have time to go, oh, maybe we should apply this process to here, because they're doing 40 things. And so it's really incumbent upon us in a polite way to remind and suggest and sometimes demand, here's the tools that are out there. You already have them. Let's use them,
Because I remember people were getting off, they were talking about what was, and it's been a little bit, but what was in that first column, or what we want to talk about this, we want to not, and people were kind of jumping around.
Oh, they wanted to talk about the bins.
The bins.
At those meetings, at that meeting forum, and any of these meeting forums, you can only talk about the agenda item you're talking on. And again, none of us are professional at this. And so you got some Yahoo like me on the internet telling you to call in and talk during a meeting, and then you talk and you want to tell your story about how you fish, and they say, no, now's not the time. You got to wait till the end or whenever. It's a system. It's a process. And to be effective in the process, we have to navigate within the confines of its rules, for sure.
I actually thought about reaching out to Samantha and having her on.
That's a good idea.
Just to be like, hey, let's chat. Because I kind of agree, like, the end goal, I think the end goal is we all have a really healthy ocean.
That's right.
I don't think anybody, like that's the focus. And
that's right.
I think we can make it a win-win with managing it.
You're catching exactly what I'm saying. I don't think Samantha is a bad person in any way whatsoever. In fact, I'm sure she's a really great person. We might have opinions on some things with MPAs, but I mean, she's dedicated her life to this, dude. She volunteers. She's dealing with all this stuff. And she's not doing it from an evil place of like, let's rip these guys off.
Wow.
It's coming. And I don't even think, honestly, from what some of the things I learned today, I don't even think she's at a place where she's even considering this petition or that petition. I think she's just really trying to get information. And so a good use of today's time too is to just put that out there that I think it would be a good idea to have Samantha on and let her give her take. She teaches at Scripps down there.
Right.
And let her, because it's really hard to communicate effectively on something as nuanced and emotional as what we're talking about right now.
Oh, 100%.
In a couple minutes, and then over comments on Instagram. It's not a good way to do it. And so the more we can have long form conversations like this, the better.
Yeah, I agree. My question with going back to some of the MPA stuff, the spillage, because that's been brought up. Is there any truth that there's been that actually works, spillage?
So we're getting into the weeds, but let's get into the weeds.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Samantha and others would tell you, and I think there's validity to that. I dissent a little bit, but the idea of the marine protected areas, particularly these ones from the petition from the Marine Life Protection Act, are not to benefit fishing. They're to what's going on inside of the reserve is what I understand. We want to build things. Ancillary benefit would be spillover, right? But it's not a goal for the thing. They, in the past and present, are kind of sold that way a little bit, like, hey, we're going to do this, and then you're going to get the spillover effect. But the reason that those things were put in place is not for that. I just want to be really, really clear.
Because she had mentioned the goals that they had, or the whatever it was they had for those, and I wanted to look up what.
There's 6, right? Is it one that includes rebuilding fish stocks? And I'm trying to quote. It's not exact, but out of the 6, there's one little stanza of like number 3 or something like that says rebuilding fish stocks or rebuilding ecosystems. Including ones with economic value, which people like me would then say that means fishing. Right. And the other side would say maybe not. Maybe economic value is sightseeing and other things like that. And that's another one of those nuanced arguments. But there are things like the Marine Life Management Act, which we're supposed to apply to all of our fisheries, that talk about MPAs as a fisheries management tool. And I'm going to answer your question. So there is that study in the Channel Islands, Northern Channel Islands, that showed definite spillover from lobster There is a study in Carmel Bay and Monterey, I think, where they looked at kelp rockfish. And they did some really neat stuff, I think, even with like genetics, and were able to see that there was crossbreeding or larval distribution from one area to another, right? Like you said, I stick my face in the water for 30 years, and if you make a big area and freaking close it off, it's anecdotally, it's going to probably benefit stuff. To what degree and on the species level, probably some of the others. Anecdotally, in my own backyard where I grew up on that big reserve that they put in. And again, you got to be so careful with this stuff because it could be water, it could be there's different. But there are way more sheephead, and particularly big sheephead, on the margins of that thing and further. There are way more black sea bass. Black sea bass might be just an overall recovery. There's way more lobster. And I'm not a scientist in any way whatsoever, but my theory is if I had some money and it was valuable to research, I think things that are competitive and have ranges, like so if I think of sheephead and big bull lobster and stuff like that, when all the rocks get stuffed full of lobster, the big ones kind of hold roost and want to, right? And so I think and sheephead are another one. They battle each other. And so I think things like that might be more prone to spillover, where other more sedentary things that are less competitive are. That is my own completely unfounded and made up theory. I
have a few of those too myself.
Looking at stuff.
Yeah.
But so, like I said before, they're good MPAs in the proper amount that still allow for sustainable harvest. Having a network, having 16.2 of our marine ecosystems in them now, and about 9 or 10% no take. Then I add on top of that, there's that big area off of Point Magoo that you can't touch. There's the constant closures at San Clemente. There's the whole zone inside of, I think, 100 yards or 100 feet at San Nick. There's rockfish closures. There's depth restrictions, all that. At any given time, I would argue, I got to be careful. A lot of our coast is not fishable, not legally fishable. And so does it make sense to place new marine reserves? And we need to talk about the climate change thing, or the marine heat waves and that. Does it make sense to put those in areas where they're going to cause harm to people's lives? If what those people are doing isn't a problem, that's the crux of this.
Yeah, especially San Nicolas. Now you mentioned it with the weather out there and the wind, and it's just not that accessible.
And there's a military closure inside of 100 feet, right, or 100 yards. I can't remember what it is, right? And then there's that one part of San Clemente, and then San Clemente. All of those things add up. I keep alluding to this. So there's several petitions, and the one that's in Point Loma is number 33, and it's the same one. That one petition asks to close Point Loma. It asks to close Santa Cruz, California. It's a big ask, that one. And that one's rationale statement is that we need to preserve what they call persistent kelp beds, meaning these things didn't get hurt by climate change. They're really big and healthy. Let's shut them down to any stressors whatsoever as insurance policy against potential future problems. And when I mean shut them down, I keep saying this over and over, shut them down to fishing, all fishing.
It seems premature to me. I mean,
it seems premature, and it's
there's no problem.
You think.
Yeah, if there's no problem, then you don't need to do it.
And even if there was a problem, even if there was marine heat waves, or there was muddy water coming out of the Tijuana River, or all that stuff,
San Diego Bay, there.
We've seen that happen, right? Is there any more or less kelp inside and outside of marine protected areas after that marine heat wave? It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
They don't help against that. And there's very, very little science, if any, particularly north of Point Conception. There's some idea down where you guys are, south of Point Conception, maybe up a little bit further. Large lobster, large rock crabs, and sheephead eat urchins. And so if there was a problem and we want to make kelp healthier, maybe we should manage those species. But to put a giant marine reserve to confer better resilience for a kelp ecosystem to climate change, there's nothing on that. There's one guy from a PhD postdoc at Stanford who's if you read these petitions, his paper is cited over and over and over. It's a brand new paper and it's thin data, and it's down there. To do a massive change like that to California's life on one little thing that someone just came up with is not okay.
Yeah. So my issue with that particular piece with the MPAs, was that we're not considering the fact that these animals migrate either. And they migrate and they move.
There's all kinds of factors.
And so one day there might be how many times I dove and there's lobster everywhere. The next day there's nothing.
Yeah.
And same with sheep's head. And then the other thing down here, like you're saying, where I say, if you want to protect the kelp, then I'll tell you what, why don't we just take a no-take on sheep's head and hopefully
or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Because the bigger ones are the ones that usually eat the urchins, not the smaller ones.
That is exactly.
Yeah. So maybe just
and there is on the positive scientific side on that. There's a paper, I think that's mostly based at Santa Rosa Island. And it kind of proves that out in that area. There's way larger sheephead inside the reserve and way larger lobster inside of the reserve than outside. And that one reserve seems to have fared better during a marine heat wave episode, or overall warming seas than other areas. You can look at a lot of different angles there. It might have been a very healthy area to start with and everything else, but that one kind of makes sense. And so to me, it goes back to the original question, what's the problem? And if the problem is, and it can be shown that we need to protect kelp, and kelp is getting beat up all over the place, and the culprit are these sea urchins, and we need big sheephead and big lobster. Well, let's use adaptive management through the regulatory framework that the Department of Fish and Wildlife has, and then that's adopted by the Fish and Game Commission to deal with that. And those little changes will have an ecosystem level cascade as opposed to shutting off everything, right? The other thing about shutting off everything, and this is interesting, our current ways those marine protected areas are set up, once they're a marine protected area, I can't touch anything. So if I wanted to go in and do kelp restoration, which is something that has been shown to have a lot of value, I can't. You're not allowed to. If I wanted to go in and pull up invasive seaweed, I can't. When it's a no-take marine reserve, you can't touch it. And go ahead.
Is there any talk on it's a marine preserve? Have they talked about rotating them? Hey, we're going to open this one, close this one, open this one, close this.
Again, they're not for a fisheries management tool. So, yeah. And that wasn't how it was set up originally. I remember people talking about that when we were doing this. So Hawaiians did that forever, right? It's a fisheries management system. I think that stuff makes sense, but the current deck of cards we have, that's not in the hand. It's not how it works.
Because the one thing I will say too, that concerns me is when something is closed, for example, La Jolla Cove, you could never open that place up and not have an absolute massacre of fish.
Dumb fish that haven't.
Yeah. It wouldn't even be fair, but a lot of people want to shoot a 10-pound calico, so there'd be people coming out of the woodwork, and that thing would be done, and all the progress would be done in a weekend.
That's right. And so you're starting to get into some of the nuance and because when we do look at this from a conservation side, I have a way easier argument. If I just go fishing access, screw all these enviros, blah, 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 right? And make that constitute, right? But we're not doing that. we have to start with, and that's, the conservation side and being good stewards. No one's affected more than we are, really, if the thing does collapse. So I gotta have faith that the process is a good process. I gotta have the mind for taking care of what's there, and then I keep saying it: sustainable activities. If the science is showing that we're managing this in a way, and I can take, a 14-inch calico, and what is it, 4 of them now or whatever, and that's okay. And I don't even need to always do that, but the scientists say that's good. And if it's not good, they change it pretty quickly. I have to have faith in that.
Yeah. And the other thing about it too is that if you're using a boat and you're having to go farther and farther, you're burning up fossil fuels.
Yeah, that's right.
And you can't go shore dive because you need to get in my little skiff to go burn the thing,
Yep. Let me give you this too. We talked about commercial fishing, and I talked about some of the issues there and the carbon footprint. But what we also do is it's called exporting the problem, right? And white sea bass is the best example, particularly this year. Our gillnet fleet did not have a great year this year because and I know there was a crap ton of white sea bass this year, right?
Yeah, I saw a lot of pictures.
That's first. They were in Mexico. And Mexico does not have at all the same guidelines that we do. They don't have seasons. They're supposed to have a size limit, but again, anecdotally, this is me just repeating what I hear at these fish and game meetings. And so they dumped a whole bunch of white sea bass on the market at $1 a pound. And so go even further. So right now, you guys are dealing with a beautiful bluefin tuna fishery where you got local bluefin, right? Well, let's say I didn't have local bluefin and a chef wanted tuna. I'm probably going to get big eye or ahi, yellowfin, and it could be from Indonesia or it could be from, and I don't want to pick on that country because I don't know if that's one that's perpetrating this, but once you get outside of our waters, in California, arguably is like the best. Once I get outside of the United States, once I get outside of California, there could be indentured servant stuff going on, slave labor, freaking mislabeling. We don't want to export the problem. What we want to do, and this is why if you look at the legislation of the 30 by 30 and then the executive order that went through, if it is implemented as it's written, there's a whole thing on protecting domestic food supply. There's a whole thing on ensuring access. If we make sure those words mean to us what they do to people that would like to us not to fish, we're in a much better place. Because what we're doing in the world, because what we're doing is protecting our local commercial fishermen and our local sports fishermen, but we're protecting the local economy. We're doing it the right way, and we're not contributing to lawlessness outside of our waters.
That's one of the frustrating things, I think, also that I've gone through traveling the world. It's like, here we are in the U.S. doing everything. And the minute you leave the border, you're like, nobody gives a shit.
At all.
And it's like,
at all.
Oh, that's great. Meanwhile, literally everywhere else I've gone, nobody gives a shit. Both marine and terrestrial. Like,
there's a lot of things that,
like parts of China that have been, or parts of Korea, not just to pick on the Asian countries, but also, anywhere. And it's insane.
It's different. And so we've been the example, and a big part of what we're doing now from the environmental side is we want to continue to be the example. So we want very stringent, I shouldn't say stringent, but we really want to focus on these marine protected areas to be a global leader. When livelihoods start suffering and ways of life start suffering, just to be a global leader and to have the precautionary principle in place, we got to scratch our heads, and we all got to come to the table, and it needs to be a more robust conversation with more stakeholders represented, and it needs to be more balanced. And so what we're doing in all this, Brett, is just trying to seek balance, trust in the process, seek balance.
If you don't mind, I want to end there because it's a really good point. Just to say,
awesome.
Take out the fact that we're fishermen, and let's come together. And I think, in our country, this applies to so many things, cool school shootings and everything else, where we all want a common goal. I truly believe there's like I've said this with school shootings personally, it's like nobody wants school shootings. But the problem is we have two sides that don't agree on how to get there. But if the end result is like, let's all just calm the fuck down because we both want to get there. So let's just talk about it.
That's right.
So nobody has ill intentions.
I really don't think there's ill intentions. It's just two different philosophies and not enough, I will say, transparency and access. Yeah. Whether intentional or not intentional, our voices just aren't being heard in this. I want to give credit. There was that same process in the past where the tribal communities were really kind of left out. And I will say that all state agencies, but particularly Fish and Wildlife and the Fish and Game Commission, have done a tremendous job, including tribal voices, co-management. They have tribal liaisons and all that. What I don't want to have happen in this go-round is that the rest of us are like the tribal entities before, the tribal communities before, where we're left because we don't have a voice. We have the opportunity to have that voice. We just need to stand up and speak.
And when is the next event? Or where to find all the events?
Yeah,
All Waters?
I'm going to keep plugging All Waters because that's all we do really. We're going to do a couple of different things. It's going to be podcasts like this and videos to get people to understand what's going on and be involved. And then we're going to be a conduit for information about what's going on and a call to action, and partnering with other organizations like ours. The next, so there's a, what I want to say is, I'll say the next actual scheduled one to go to, but it's not for you guys. It's a live one for the 30 by 30 thing. And it's in Monterey, Pebble Beach area. It's a place called the Silmar, on the 27th. And there's 2 sessions. There's one at 11 and I think there's 2 sessions. And the link's on our bio. You got to pre-register. And that's a good one to show up to. And then there's a Fish and Game Commission meeting in October. But let's not even talk about those. I think if people are willing to go to the one in Monterey, that's a good one to go to and get the information on our Instagram. But the opportunity now is really, even if you showed up to these meetings, you only get to talk for a minute or 2 minutes, and at the specified time. And so all I would ask you to do if you showed up to the meeting is tell your story. And so when is the next thing to really specifically answer your question? Right now. Find 15, 20, whatever it takes. We can put templates out. I would prefer not to. All I need people to do, I should say, all you need to do for yourself and your community in the future and those voiceless people is say, hey, my name's Brett Whitman. I've been doing spearfishing and fishing for this long. I've been doing it in these areas. I understand there's a lot of marine reserves being considered. The specific one in Point Loma would really hurt me, but all of them, I would really ask that you look for science behind what's the problem you're trying to solve. Is there really a problem? Is fishing the problem? Are the solutions you're looking at helping with things like the runoff and pollution and things we know are problems? And if you put these things in, are you considering the great damage it's going to do to people's lives? I would really ask you to look at this carefully, follow the process that you've laid out to do that. That involves science. It involves socioeconomic research. It involves deep and varied stakeholder input. I request that you follow that process. Sincerely, Brett Whitman, San Diego, California. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
yeah.
I'll get the shit together then. Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll make tools. We'll put tools out, but it's going to say what I just said. And I'll say it's frustrating. We even put out tools like click the friggin' button or do whatever. And like, it's just, people are so busy and doing so many other things. And I know, right? I mean, I've got a family. We're waiting to eat dinner as I do this podcast. I run a company. I've got all kinds of hobbies. I'm doing this whole thing. I'm asking for people to legitimately take however long it takes for you to write. If you even wrote, my name is Brett Whitman. I'm a spear fisherman and fisherman. I've enjoyed fishing forever. I really don't agree with any new marine protected areas unless they're completely necessary because fishing is the problem. Something that simple to just let these folks know that you care and you're listening, and then you might be hurt. Like,
yeah, I agree. You can literally do that while you're sitting on the toilet like me, and knock it out. I did it before, I think.
It doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to be nuanced. You don't need to know a ton about all this type of stuff. If you want that stuff, and you want to be smarter on it, friggin' DM me at Cut Professor or DM All Waters, or, I'll get you educated quick. We got tons of videos I can put in front of you and stuff like that. Listen to this podcast. Long form podcasts are great, but it's from the heart. I've been asking my friends with kids, like, show your freaking kid fishing. Like a video's great. What I envision doing at some point at one of these meetings is if we cede time to each other, we got like a minute or 3 minutes and we can do it enough, they might give us 10 minutes and I can play a 10-minute loop of all of us saying, here's what this would mean if you took this away. Right?
Yeah. I got a question. We mentioned last thing, and then I'll let you go. We've mentioned, California, but is the same kind of stuff going on in other states as well, like Florida, or, is it?
I'm going to plead ignorance on the specifics of other states. I know there are marine reserves in other states. California, by far, we have 124 interconnected MPAs with different levels of take allowed. Is the crown jewel truly in this thing in the world, and the process to put it in place. I mean, there's been papers and studies on it. We are truly leaders in what's going on. Globally, New Zealand has done a lot of this. I remember even in the late 90s, early 2000s, they had already put in some marine reserves, and we looked at those. And so they're all over the world, spread out all over the place. California is at the forefront.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I think some marine reserves are cool to have. So you can take your kids swimming in them and like, here's an aquarium. Let me show you what I hunt when we go hunting or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what it also does in a value of MPAs, it helps scientists and the managers, I keep saying, that are doing a great job and we want to lean on them. It informs scientific decision because they can see, I'm not going to say untouched because nothing's untouched, but they can go to a fully functioned, untapped resource and see how things interact and then compare that to somewhere else and say, what's broken? So it's a very
control group.
It's a really good, it's control, really good tool.
Yeah. Dude, thank you, Mel.
Like I'm to some degree, I'm pro MPA, but this isn't a pro or con thing. This is a very nuanced conversation that intersects with people's lives and legal stuff and all kinds of things. And if we just stick to the premise that we all want a healthy ocean, we want to be able to feed ourselves if it's sustainable and keep access. I think that keeps the vision pretty clear of what we need to do.
Yeah, it's almost like do a brainstorming session with what is the problem? Okay, and what factors apply to this problem? What are the major factors that apply? Let's rate them 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
And then go, let's tackle these things first.
If you wrote that in a letter, dude, that would be the ideal letter because that's all we're saying.
Yeah.
The people on the commission and on the department, you hear them say, wait, what's the problem we're trying to solve? I've heard it repeated over and over and over. And no one has clearly been able to exhibit to me and people way smarter than me with redundant and proper data that here's the problem we're trying to solve.
Right. I mean, I listened to that meeting and it was like what's the problem? I heard that too, where they're like, well, that's not what we're trying to solve right now. I'm like, well, what the hell are we talking about? Wait, what's going on? Yeah.
Awesome, man. This was a
All right,
great
thank you.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so
You
much.
went at a different point on something fun like spearing fish and cooking or something.
Yeah, like actually enjoying ourselves, like doing stupid stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome, Brett.
Okay.
Appreciate
thank you,
man.
Thank you, brother.
Have a good night,
Yep.
brother.